Chapter 5 is about different kinds of sentence errors. So from the previous chapters, you know that to be a complete sentence, a group of words must have a subject, a verb, and it must express a complete thought or make sense on its own. So today I'm going to talk to you about different kinds of sentence errors. One being a sentence fragment, and the other grouped together being comma splices and run-ons. So first let's talk about what a sentence fragment is. A sentence fragment is a group of words that is either missing a subject or a verb or a complete thought or a combination of them. So for some reason it's incomplete. It's a fragment because it's missing something and cannot be punctuated as though it's a complete sentence on its own. So for example, when she came. This has a subject, it has a verb, but because it starts with a subordinating conjunction, it doesn't make sense on its own. When she came. That doesn't make sense unless it had other words attached to it, so it could not be punctuated as though it's a complete sentence. This, therefore, is what's called a sentence fragment. Here's another example. Every morning before he wakes up. Again, this has a subject, it has a verb, but it doesn't make sense on its own. Every morning before he wakes up, what happens? You're left wondering something. It's not a complete thought, so it's therefore a sentence fragment. The third example of a sentence fragment only has a verb, but no subject. Ran all the way home from work. The reader is left wondering who ran all the way home from work. It's missing a subject, so it's therefore a sentence fragment. These can be very easy to identify when they're in isolation or by themselves like this, but when they're in the middle of other sentences, they can be harder to find. So for example, if you had, when she came, I was excited, you might read that all together and not recognize that this is in fact a sentence fragment because currently I have it punctuated as though it's a sentence that can stand on its own, when really, because it's a dependent clause, it should group with this sentence with a comma. Okay, so those are sentence fragments. Sentence fragments, again, are missing either a subject or a verb or a complete thought or a combination of those things. Now I want to move on and talk about comma splices and run-ons. Comma splices and run-ons occur when you have two independent clauses, two complete sentences, that are joined improperly. So a comma splice occurs when you have two complete sentences joined with only a comma. So for example, the weather was disappointing, we canceled the picnic. Again, go back to your understanding of subjects and verbs. So here's my subject, here's my verb, subject, verb. Those are two independent clauses. Those could stand on their own as two complete sentences. And when we talked about compound sentences, which is what this should be, since it has two independent clauses, we talked about how it cannot be joined with only a comma. There were other ways to join it. If all you have is a comma here, then you have a sentence error called a comma splice, because that comma is joining two complete sentences, and that's not allowed in terms of punctuation. The second kind of sentence error that falls into this category of two independent clauses being joined improperly is called a run-on. A run-on occurs when you have two complete sentences that are joined with no punctuation. One just runs on into the next one. The weather was disappointing, we canceled the picnic. This currently has no punctuation there, so it's another kind of sentence error called a run-on because one sentence just runs into the other one. In order to correct this, you'd have to go back to a previous chapter and review the concept of a compound sentence to find the three different ways to properly connect two independent clauses.